video it. I always forget to press play, and then I'm like, man, that was a good class, and then it didn't get videoed. So let me begin. Domain 3 poses a challenge to people because, and this is across the board, most people typically have difficulties with domain 1 and domain 3, and domain 3 in like higher numbers because it is a synthesis, a combination of several things married together to work well. So your knowledge of standard 1, which is the 100% of domain 1, which is your planning of instruction and your planning of assessment for all students, for all their diversity, to make sure that the objectives are aligned with the TEKS and are measuring the things that they're supposed to be measuring, that you are facilitating support for your ELL students or special ed students, for every age group, cognitive, emotional, social development. And domain 3 is that what I just said, and your implementation of it. What particular communication skills do you utilize in order to do the things that you've planned, in order to assess the things that you've, delineated in your plan? And what questions did you craft mindfully beforehand in order to facilitate conversations among students, in order to facilitate, data, right? To help you gather that data of where the students are in that particular objective, in that particular building of skill. So, and then also on top of that, your synthesis of technology, utilizing technology in a meaningful way to help you achieve those goals, to help you achieve the goals of planning for all students, mindful instruction and assessment, and then the implementation of that in an effective way where you're able to actively instruct. Because we can plan for instruction and give our speech first 15 minutes, and then have them do guided practice where we're modeling, and then have them do independent practice and then walk around. But if we're not actively instructing in an engaging in a real way, providing meaningful, effective feedback in a timely manner when they're doing the skill, when they're practicing the concept or skill in the classroom, providing that timely, effective feedback so that it's active instruction, where we don't have to sit back and plan a whole new thing to get that student that support. We do it right then and there. Or we say, okay, guys, let's bring it to the table. It seems we're lost on this concept, right? If I walk around and I hear lots of confusion in my cooperative learning groups, right away, active instruction means that I am going to reteach that particular concept, knowledge concept, and remodel that skill so that I rectify the confusion or the miscommunication, and that instruction continues, that I don't sit on that information and say, okay, half the class got it wrong, maybe tomorrow I should do this. No, right then and there I can say, guys, it seems that some of us are confused about what particular words make something diction and when it's not. So let's go back and look at what the definition of diction is and some examples that we looked at before. And let's practice again. If I see that that's an area of need, I'm going to immediately take that time to actively instruct, especially now, if I have one student, that won't be the case. I'm not going to take time to like redirect, re-instruct, right? If you find a large majority, take that time. If it's just small, that direct, effective feedback to the student, like, oh, well, let's take a look at the diction, and doing that reteach right then and there at the table or at their desk, as opposed to like drawing everyone's attention. But domain 3 is your synthesizing of what you know about students, where they are, what they need, So if I am in domain 3, that means I'm doing it. I'm not planning it or thinking about it beforehand, but I'm actually doing it in the classroom. And it's that responsive, active instruction and assessment. Remember, assessment is done every single day. Teachers assess every day. That doesn't mean that we give exams or quizzes every day. It means that we ask questions. It means that we are gathering data in order to assess our students, to gauge our students' mastery of particular objectives that we've set forth, that the state has set forth within the TEKS. So our assessment is all day, every day, via various means, right? It could be formative assessments, which can be informal, and they can be formal, or summative assessments, which are very formal and always formal. So, but we're constantly gathering this information so that we can be better at helping the students. Where are they and what do they need to get to where they need to go? Domain 3 is about what you're doing in the classroom. The particular skills of questioning, the levels of questioning, the way in which you guide discussions, not so much lead discussions, but guiding the discussions. The most important thing to remember is not us talking in the classroom that's important. It's their talking, not about anything, not about like, whatever it is that the students watch these days, but about the content and finding ways to get them to talk about it by connecting it to their prior knowledge, the real world around them, things that they're interested in, so that they can explore the content and in meaningful ways. We want for the students to ask questions. We want for them to be talking. We want to get to a place, and I'm going to just bump out of here really quickly to show you a visual that I haven't shown in a while, but that's really important for us to remember about our goals in the classroom, and always best practices for your exam, right? We can't always do it. It's not possible for us to exist in student-centered learning 100% of the time. There comes a time and a place, and very purposefully and reasonably so, for teacher-centered learning. When I am direct instructing students on new vocabulary, all of that is teacher-centered. I have formulated it to be connecting with my students based on who they are, based on my audience, their skill level, their culture, prior experiences. I'm going to try to utilize that in order to better explicitly illustrate. Sorry, I have 2 puppies behind me and they're like being kind of loud. So I'm going to try my best to illustrate for students this new content, this new vocabulary, right? Academic specific vocabulary, always and every time we direct instruct academic vocabulary, always. And that's teacher-centered, because I'm presenting this knowledge to you, and I'm also presenting ways in which you can connect it to things you already know. Teacher-centered, right? We want the students to mostly exist in our class in student-centered. So apart from direct instruction and modeling of skills that are new, most of it should be the students doing, trying in carefully crafted activities to acquire the skills that we demonstrated for them or that we modeled for them. We want for them to be in the student-centered section, discussing the content-specific vocabulary that we took the time to direct instruct, that is pertinent to the lesson and the activities, having them do think, pair, shares, having them do find somebody who, having them do cooperative learning activities where they're asking questions, where they are forced to write about, think about, talk about the concepts in and amongst themselves. Granted, in order for that to work, you have to have carefully crafted your cooperative learning groups. Gone are the days, and this is when I was a student in high school, they would say, okay, guys, get in groups of 3 or get in groups of 4. That's not a thing anymore that you can do. In order to be a structured, sort of like purposeful educator, and someone who doesn't make more work for themselves, then you will carefully craft your cooperative learning groups to be a mixture of skill level, language ability, culture, socioeconomic. You want to have a mixture of people, but certainly of skill, ability, language, and ability, because you are not going to be able to direct instruct everybody, to be able to have every conversation and practice every time with that content specific vocabulary. And they need to talk about it with somebody, and it has to be somebody who is beneficial, would be a beneficial exercise for them. And so by carefully crafting them, you are taking your resources, all of your students and their skill levels, and helping them be resources to each other. So my daughter is in GT, and she often is paired with special ed students when she's working, and she's like very articulate and incredibly empathetic and kind. And for her, I know that some parents might say or feel, well, why should my child have to help this other student when they're struggling? Shouldn't that be the teacher's job? Actually, that added step of helping someone else understand and orally articulating in your own words in a way that that student would understand, it's something that I try to have my students, my teachers that are, like you guys, my teacher students, I try to encourage you guys to talk about these concepts with people, because the more that you can talk about them and is the better that you know them. So when you're talking about Piaget's learning theories, not just talking about the different levels, but how you would utilize them, why it even matters. Why do we even study Piaget? Well, because it told us how particular students in different age groups, their brain is developed at a certain time, and what sort of functions they're able to carry out at that level of growth and development. We know, because of Piaget's theories, that our elementary students are, and we could have known it just by our observations, this is if we taught and worked or were at all around I think that they're fighting. I'm sorry. I got sidetracked with noises behind me. If you work with children, you would be able to understand that, the smaller age groups, they're simple-minded. They're very innocent. And it is because they're unable to abstract. They're unable to synthesize things in a way for abstraction. Their brains are not yet developed in that way physiologically. And we know the way in which those things develop is via experience. And so those neurological pathways, as they continue to grow and develop and experience new things, they become stronger in that sense of abstraction. So we learned that from Piaget. When you're practice learning about these things, or when you're practicing these ideas, these concepts, or thinking about what ways best to study, you're never going to be asked what is Piaget's precognitive development, or you're never going to be asked to define something. You're going to be analyzing a scenario that they've given you, in which you have to utilize these theories, these best practices, as far as differences between teacher-centered and student-centered, the importance of oral language proficiency, knowing what is best for the students, and applying that to the given scenario. As we did last week, we're going to go through some more domain 3 questions from the manual. Unless somebody has, Ms. Ramos, can you hear? I'm just seeing your message on the chat that you can't hear. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I'm able to hear now. Thank you so much.
Okay, I apologize. All late.
Yeah,
It's a good thing you can hear. Okay.
Yes, I can hear. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So Domain 3 is your synthesis, speaking about synthesis and abstraction. It's your marriage of what we know from human growth and development based on their cognitive development, skill level, social, emotional, disability, diversity, what we know about planning, what we know about resources, what we know about language, and how we utilize that information in order to provide the most effective instruction. And there are best practices for everything that we do in each section. In the planning section, there are best practices. If you know you have ELL students, there are best practices for you to do before you begin a lesson. You know, when you're considering the types of assessments, when you're considering the types of activities and visuals that you provide. So for every area, for domain 1, there are best practices. And there are keywords and phrases that should alert you. I need to keep these best practices in mind as you're reading your the scenarios, as you're reading the questions, because above all, this is a critical reading exam. So when they tell you an age group or a grade level, that should be a red flag to theory, human growth and development theory, and what that means as far as planning and instruction. What we do with kindergartners is very different than what we do with 7th graders, what we would plan for 7th graders. A lesson for 7th graders is going to be totally different than an English language arts and reading lesson for kindergartners. Kindergartners have not yet learned to read. Some of them might know how to read, but they have not yet been systematically instructed to learn to read. So the bulk of our instruction, especially in the beginning of the year for kindergarten, is going to be oral, and it's going to be visual. And we're going to begin that breaking down and connection between phonemes, morphemes, and getting them to be reading. So the way in which that we instruct at different levels for different content areas is different. Not so much different content areas, but certainly different age groups. With our elementary students, they have to have concrete examples, real experience. Instead of reading a book about growing a plant or the stages of growth for a plant, they need to plant a seed in the dirt, put their finger to make the hole, water it, watch that growth, document that growth, discuss that growth, have lessons on the different things that they are seeing in their growth. And that is more resonant for knowledge, internal knowledge creation of those ideas than simply me reading a book about the plant life, watching a video of a plant growing. Can I do that also? Yes. But it can't take the place of growing the plant, especially not in those elementary stages. So this, hold on one second. Moving on. And go back to domain 3. Domain 3, that implementation of your amazing plan that you did. It has to be effective, means it has to work. It has to be responsive in that you're constantly checking for understanding, and if there are needs that you respond to them. If there is confusion, that you redirect, and that you're assessing all the while. Let me see. I talked about the skilled questioning. Your skilled questioning is so important, because if you give a yes or no type question, you're going to get a yes or no type response, and it's not going to lead to fruitful discussion. And remember, we want students to be writing about the things that they're learning and talking about the things that they're learning. over and over and over again, extending their knowledge with other people, negotiating their knowledge with think, pair, shares, which fosters this like active student participation and even inquiry, because when students think, pair, share, and those activities that allow students to talk to each other, communication, very, very important. Those activities help them negotiate meaning. So if I am confused about something, and I'm with Ms. Ramos in a think, pair, share, and she understood it very clearly because our teacher paired us together and knew she's a little bit stronger and needs to be sort of partnered with me. And we got together and I said, I think it's, the friction causing the delay. And she would say, no, it wasn't friction. It's actually, wind resistance, because it has the thing floating behind it. And so I said, oh, that's right. That would be the bigger thing. And so we are negotiating our understanding, and I am building on my already previous understanding. So getting the students to engage with each other, utilizing them together in order to build on their language skills and in their content knowledge, making sure that when you are questioning the students that you are providing appropriate wait time. That was one of the questions that we looked at practice-wise on Saturday. And it was about specifically wait time. And wait time, it is research proven that educators, teachers, professors, instructors, they get better responses if you extend wait time, appropriate wait time. And this could mean even the wait time is extended because I gave you a question that you're going to write down your response written, and then you're going to think, pair, share, and then we're going to come back to whole group discussion. That's an extended wait time. And then I call on someone. That's a long time. And even so, I can give you a few more seconds to gather yourself, but extending it. And it could also mean I call on you and give you 15 seconds extra. I talk about other ways in which you can get the students to always engage in this response back to you, having them do a find somebody who activity, not activity, but it's just something that a policy in my classroom where you couldn't opt out of responding. You couldn't say like, I don't know, like that. And I did ELAR, so it was a little bit easier. And not even really, you should never just say, I don't know. That's the whole purpose that we're in school, right? It's because we don't know. There's lots of things that we don't know. And so I don't know can never be an okay response for us. And so that's like an opt out, and we never opt out of responding. So if you don't know, there's someone in this classroom who does know, and I would allow them to phone a friend, like that show, like, I think it's like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or something, and you can like phone a friend or use a lifeline. And so they could do that, and they could whisper with somebody and phone a friend, but they still have to tell me back. I still want to hear it from them. They still have to synthesize based on what they heard from someone else and what they kind of know in themselves, and tell me. And that added practice, that added step, that added sort of diversion from opting out allows them extra practice. And we always want to take that. And that's an extended wait time. Now, what's appropriate is what's appropriate to you and what's appropriate to the student based on where they are. With ELL students, I know I need to extend my wait time. Even if I did a think, pair, share, and I gave them the time to write it down, think, pair, share, we're coming back, they might need a little bit of time. They might be a little bit nervous with speaking, a new language, even though they're confident in what they're going to say. Give them time, extend that wait time to get that response that you want. With directions, always and every time, you're going to want to provide clear, effective expectations for your students and directions, so that they're not shooting in the dark. They want to know where to shoot. Students will shoot for where we set for them, and we want to have high expectations. We want to clearly sort of explain those to them, any directions, procedures. And with differentiating, some people, it's not enough to hear them. Okay, maybe Miss Sauceda said, do this first. Make sure you do this first. Do this second. Make sure you do the second. Some people are visual and they need to refer back to it, or they're ADHD and they like thought about something else while you said step 2 or step 3. And now I don't know. So if I'm a teacher and I only provided orally my explanation of what to do, some people are going to be left out. Provide different avenues for that communication success, right? Say it to them clearly, effectively, but you could also have the steps simplified and posted on the board, have something printed out for them at their desk, making sure that our communication is varied in the way that their learning styles are varied, right? So they learn in different ways and they can also ingest communication in different ways and differentiating for those students. Okay, so the engaging of the students in the learning process. In order for the students to be engaged, they have to be part of the discussion. Now, it's difficult when you're having to just listen to someone to remain engaged. But if you have a very like poignant question for your students to ask, and it gets them thinking about things, which we're going to take a look at some poignant questions in just a bit based on this manual, then that active engagement can take place. It has to resonate with them. It has to, try to connect with their daily lives as much as possible in order to help promote that active student engagement. Whenever possible, utilizing their interests, right? What are they interested in to include it as part of that buy-in? Problem solving, they want to solve a puzzle, then they're going to do it. Structuring lessons effectively. You don't want to define your vocabulary at the end of the lesson. Let's say that I'm a teacher, first year teacher, and I give my lesson and then I highlight key concepts. And at the end of it, I give my super awesome visuals, very clear vocabulary instruction at the end. And I'm going to ask you guys just to unmute yourself, because right here it's talking about structuring your lessons effectively to promote engagement and also learning. We want them to be engaged and we want them to be learning. And so in structuring lessons effectively, why would it be ineffective to place my vocabulary instruction at the end of the lesson?
So students can know what the lesson's going to be about, give them a heads up.
Right, it does. Vocabulary instruction helps sort of preview or frame the lesson, not totally, but it does a little bit. What is another reason why it would be ineffective for us to structure our lesson where vocabulary is taught either as it comes up or at the end? You've already said one for sure reason, and that's it does help us frame. What are we going to learn about? What are the key concepts? What things should we know and super understand before we get into the nitty gritty? What other reason why we do vocabulary in the very beginning of the lesson before we read text?
I guess according to the students' like cognitive level or like their grade, it could be like towards the end, they're kind of, they just won't remember it. They don't catch it as much as they would at the beginning.
That is true. They are a little bit more fatigued at the end of the class, or as like I said, depending on where they are in age group or grade level, at the end of class, they're kind of like and off wandering eyes. But the most important reason is because even for our native English speakers, but especially for our ELL students, if we're going to be using unfamiliar or difficult or social words that we think are going to impede, that means mess up comprehension, then we want to pre-teach those before we get into the lesson, before we read an article that has those vocabulary words to help it. Think of it like in the olden days where there'd be like the queen and she walks over a puddle and somebody like places their cape over the puddle and she walks on it. like she might still get her feet a little wet, but not really. It helps smooth over and it doesn't make a big deal. That is what direct instruction of vocabulary does before a reading. It helps carry the comprehension. We're like, okay, I understood what that was, and it's not a total blank, my foot in there, and now my foot's all wet, and now I'm not even paying attention to the rest of the story because I don't understand this word and I'm lost on it. So it as far as our instruction, the words that we're using in our instruction, the words that we're using in our text, those things need to be covered before we go into the lesson. And so making sure that that's done in the beginning is structuring our lessons effectively, making sure that we frame the lesson in the beginning, that we, go over briefly the expectations, what objectives we might be covering. So, continuously monitoring instructional effectiveness. This helps you, this right here helps you with your responsive instruction. Remember, the overarching idea for domain 3 is responsive instruction, your implementation of this responsive instruction. And first and foremost, communication is needed for responsive instruction. You cannot responsively or effectively instruct students if you're not communicating your expectations for the day. These are our objectives. This is me framing the lesson, what we're going to do. This is the main ideas, key concepts that you need to know what they're about before we get into the nitty-gritty. So this is us engaging. You utilizing those beginning strategies, pre-teaching your vocabulary, framing your lesson, utilizing flexible instructional grouping will help keep your students, engaged as well. If a student is struggling and they have someone in their group that is effective in supporting them, and that's not to say they're going to support them the entire time. You are obviously walking around, but my like I said, I don't mean to use Zuri as an example all the time, but she does help a lot of her students, and she loves it and just becomes like this expert in the TEAC, and then is able to even go above and beyond when she goes to her GT class that they have every week. But that flexible pairing allows for engagement to continue, where whoever she's paired with is not going to get stuck. They're not going to sit there and be twiddling their thumbs. Like, someone's not going to be sat there frustrated. And if there is a chance that like maybe there's still confusion, Zuri is very oral to ask for that necessary help, right? That has that strong oral language capacity or proficiency. And so that flexibility in your grouping, moving people to where they need to be, to where they work best, to where they build together best, and they're all on the same team. So utilizing your resources effectively, including your students, in order to create, to promote that intellectual involvement amongst each other and that active student engagement. And for some reason, students take the feedback a little bit better from their peers sometimes. There is that leg of, you're the power structure, you're the teacher, and so that redirection and that clarification via a peer that speaks to them is sometimes magic in ways we can't be. And so knowing to mindfully craft that and paying attention enough to your students, which is what you do in domain 1, knowing who your students are, knowing their skills in your content, their language skills, their oral language proficiency, their disabilities, if any, their culture, the many cultures that they're a part of, their interests, their learning preferences, and utilizing those things to create a really super effective learning environment that works for you in domain 3 in the action of implementing your plan. Because you can have a beautiful plan in place, but if it's not implemented effectively, if certain things aren't thought of, like grouping and making sure that you've done particular things to make sure that they are motivated to continue to learn. Moving down on that topic, I'm going to highlight these last 3 H, I, and J discuss our ELL students, our English language learners. And these students honestly are phenoms, poor little guys, amazing. Every best writer that I had in AP, 12th grade, 11th grade AP has been an advanced high ELL student. And I think and I've thought about it for many, many years. And I think it's that they have more access to higher vocabulary since they have all of those, the vocabulary in their home language and what that translates to us as far as synonyms. And it makes for better writing. It's almost like graduate level work once they get to advanced high, once they have that language unlocked. Before that, when they're beginners, when they're intermediates, not so much advanced and not at all advanced high, but our beginner and intermediates, it is so important that our implementation is so effective as to make sure they're able to continue to be engaged in our classroom. If a student cannot understand anything that you're talking about, if you have provided no supports to help them understand anything that you're talking about, they are not going to be motivated to participate. They are not going to be motivated to continue. Human beings do not like to feel ignorant. And these students are not ignorant. They just don't know the language. So I'm telling you, they're doing a phenomenal task. They are learning all the TEKS content on grade level while simultaneously acquiring a second language in a new culture, with a culture shock, with not everybody with their hands on deck. And in order for effective instruction or the acquisition of that second language to take place, all hands need to be on deck. And that means that we are all providing focused, targeted, and systematic second language acquisition. There are particular things that need to take place in order to be focused, targeted, and systematic. I'm just going to pop out of here really quickly to go back to, and if you've been to my sessions before, you know I love this document, but to one of my favorite documents that helps so much with clarifying ideas specific to our ELL students and to what they need. But it breaks down so nicely, and this is from TEA, and they love utilizing their own language in these Pearson exams. So here we are, ways in which teachers can be particularly focused, particularly targeted, and particularly systematic in their instruction of in their support for English language arts. And it is our job. It's listed in domain 3. It's part of our implementation, because if we don't do these things, students will not achieve mastery in our content objectives. They certainly will not be acquiring a second language, but they for sure will not be mastering those content specific objectives. So like if I'm doing science and I'm in a science 7th grade class and I have 7 ELL students and I don't do any of the supports, I just do it straight, carte blanche, just what the lesson is for, just that's it. No sort of differentiation. Not only will my ELL students not learn the science TEKS, they're not going to be actively acquiring language. And those students need to be doing both every single day. That means we need to be providing support for both. And they cannot do one without the other. I mean, they can't do the learning of your content specific TEKS without mastering the language, and which means we have to pre-teach academic vocabulary. We have to provide students with tools necessary in order to understand some of the things that we're covering, making sure that we are providing intentional, this is very important, and this is not, I always tell my students, best practices for all students across the board, just teach them like they're all English language learners, honestly. You pre-teaching academic vocabulary before a lesson will hurt nobody. Making sure that you're planning concentrated, intentional opportunities for academic and social interactions and or discourse, that means talking. We need them to become orally proficient in talking about social studies, proficient in talking about science, proficient in talking about math, proficient in talking about English language arts and reading, about theater arts in a technical sense, in an academic sense, in a social sense, but especially for our ELO students, best practices. So when you go back and you're taking a look at your competencies and your standards, make sure that you go back to that particular document, because it does such a good job of breaking down particular things like, what can I do as a teacher to help them in this particular area? Let's say in listening skills for intermediate students. How can I help intermediate students build listening skills? And that might be a question that they could very easily ask you. And it would be a domain 3 type question. You know, what sort of activities and or skills, obviously communication techniques and or activities would I do in order to build my students' oral language proficiency, which is listening and speaking. Do I have any questions so far? I just wanted to debrief domain 3 because I know I had a couple of people who needed those in particular. Before I go on to the questions or these last two, do I have any questions about?
No, we don't.
Okay, excellent. So here you have your technology, and this is a synthesis of the standards 1 through 7 of your technology application standards. And really the biggest takeaway from what I've seen on the practice questions is you being able to infuse and utilize technology in a meaningful way as an extension, as a way of extending the knowledge that you've done in class. So for instance, last week we looked at a scenario where a teacher wanted to increase student discussions or increase technology applications and also student discussions about like content specific stuff. Which one of the activities should she choose? And the choice was to incorporate this blog. But in order to get that answer right, you had to identify that two-legged goal, the utilizing collaboration or communicating with other students and technology, and blog was the only one that did that. And then you also had to know what a blog was and the fact that other people can communicate on a blog, that people comment on it and whatnot. So as you go through competency 9 of domain 3, which is specific to your implementation and use of technology as you're planning, organizing, delivering, and also evaluating, because we use technology all along the way. Mostly to deliver and to evaluate, right? But also when in our planning, right, we need to seek out the best resources. That's part of domain 1, part of planning, assessment for all planning and assessment for all students in domain 1 is you being able to seek out that high quality visual examples, audio examples, maybe virtual tours of things to help illustrate things. You infusing technology in a way that helps extend and connect the students' understanding. The highest form for our students, the highest form for us, which is why domain 3 is difficult. And I think it might be worth the most. I'll go back and look, but I think it is. Synthesis, creation, taking several things and synthesizing them together, creating, innovating. That is the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy, synthesis. It used to be, like 3rd highest, but scholarly thought has been under, argument for many, many years. Synthesis is now the highest, and there's still a little bit of squabbling after evaluation and analysis. But common thought is that the highest levels are evaluation, analysis, and synthesis. So you evaluate what's good, what's not, and then really look at like, why is this good? Like what parts make it better? What is working on here? What's not working here? Synthesis is taking different parts together and coming up with a new whole that's better, like innovating. And so really our goal is to get students to be able to take what they know and synthesize to new information. So getting the students to innovate, to creative think, always the best answer choice, always the best practice. We want for the students to create things, to innovate, to communicate and collaborate always on different campuses, with different countries, if it's possible, you know, really extrapolate their connection and dialogue with other people, and technology allows for that. So, and remember, this exam is a theoretical exam. Is this possible all the time, every day on every campus? No, we're not going to be connecting with people in France to do a project over something, but it should be the goal. And it would be something that would be a lasting sort of cool project that the students would resonate and engage in. And that's what it's about, that getting them engaged in things and thinking like, oh, these kids in France are learning the same thing. Let me think about what they're thinking about. And so that is theoretically best practice. And there are many, many, many best practice things that we know and that we try to, as much as possible, make happen on a you know, a daily basis. Last, but certainly not least, rounding back to high quality feedback. Timely means that you give it right then and there. If I'm walking by you and I saw that you didn't change, you know, what is it? Signs before you know, moved a number from one side of the equation to the other, and you left it with the same sign, and I'm walking around, I'm going to stop and say, you know, maybe draw your attention. Oh, I saw that. Good job. You moved it across there. That was the next step. But what happens when we move it across? You know, sort of pose them, like have them go over it again right then and there, not wait until I saw that he got it wrong and then turn in their work and then I count it wrong. And then that's just the end of it. And then he just got it wrong and he got an 80 on it. Taking that little bit of time to instruct and be, oh, don't forget, be mindful. What's the rule before we cross to the other side? Got to switch signs. It's however you get them to remember, but you want to give them that feedback in a timely and an effective way. Never in a disparaging way and never in a basic way, like good job or that looks wrong, you know. Those are very vague. And we're talking about children who are in their cognitive growth and development cycle. And so you need to be specific with feedback, right? And none of this beating around the bush, like you were there as a leg of support. And unless it is a state exam or like your semester exam, please redirect and re-instruct right then and there. You know, it's not like lesson learned type thing. Every opportunity and every time you see a misstep or a mistake should be an opportunity to provide that feedback. Now, obviously you can't go around and be like doing everybody all the time, but if you notice it and you're walking around, then certainly you take that time to give that feedback. And this is true for, like, I'll give you an example, PE coaches. So you can't just say, if you're the PE instructor, like, nice throw. And I'll tell you why. Let's say where I'm sixth grade PE coach and they're doing in different groups a drill, or they're going up and I say nice throw as feedback. Students are watching. Those students watching, that was an example of modeling, right? They did a good job. But it needs to be articulated well. Like, I like that, but you see how that follow through? Nice throw. That follow through allows everybody that's listening and watching to like get a little bit more instruction, a little bit more illustration as to why was that a good job. And it's not just for the student themselves, although it is for them as well to understand, oh, that skill, that follow through, I need to continue doing that. That was good. That's how I got that. Okay. Note to self, that feedback, that timely, effective, high quality feedback, which means it's specific, and it's certainly not disparaging. That doesn't mean that it can't be corrective, But you want to do it in a way that's constructive, right? Substantive, constructive, accurate, never any basic, like, oh, well done type things. Those are nice, but you want to be more specific and instructional with your feedback, more mindful. Everything is a teaching opportunity, even your feedback to other students. Other students are watching to see, what you say and what was done. And just as we are models of learning for our students, so too are the other highly skilled students in the classroom who are ready and able to help illustrate and model some of those skills in excellence, right? But they have to be sort of described and articulated in such a way so that it is instructional. It is highly effective, sort of responsive instruction. Okay, so let's take a look at some more before. Oh my goodness, we have a minute left. Let me ask you really quickly. I know some of you are new, but how many of you have attempted the practice test on Pearson? Anyone?
I have tried it.
Oh, Astrid, yes, yeah. Everyone except Astrid. Sorry, no. I'm just I'm just kidding. But I do know. So Astrid, and I know Coach, you probably haven't taken it yet, but I highly recommend you taking the practice exam on the Pearson website. It is sort of the closest, most accurate gauge of preparedness and what to expect on the exam. It's $10, but it gives you a nice little breakdown. And then you can actually review it later on and see like why the answer choice was wrong. And last week, I don't know if it was on Saturday or on Wednesday, but we looked over some of those. Okay, Giselle, that's right. We looked over some of those, and that was uploaded to the playlist, to the PPR playlist for you guys to watch. But we went over in detail with those questions. Let me see. Okay, here is, and we're just going to do this one, and then I'm going to let you guys go. And don't forget that I'm having class on Saturday. And we'll begin on Saturday with questions, because since we reviewed all of the competencies in depth. So remember that every single time you read a scenario and you read the answer choices, that I want for you to remember that it is a critical reading exam, which means that the words were carefully chosen for the scenarios, for the questions, and for the answer choices. Carefully chosen. So when they say getting students motivation, that word motivation should trigger a red flag or a neon light to prompt you to say what particular things are best practices for motivation, including the student's interests. Giving the students choices, giving them agency, or like a hand in the building or the execution, all of that, making connections to prior knowledge or real world experience. All of those things are best practices with engaging students' motivation. So when we're reading the scenarios, the questions, and the answer choices, pay attention to the keywords and phrases that they identify, right? Try to identify, what is this? Is this about strictly planning, knowing your student? Is this about implementing or communication or feedback? And try to identify keywords and phrases that you need to make sure are addressed in your answer choices, in the answer choice that you deem as correct. And as always with your answer choices, do not sort of eliminate one right away, even if, because they write the answer choices to trick you for one of them to look like a best choice, like where you're like, oh yeah, that one for sure. Like, oh, it has the word differentiate. And so that's the go-to. And it looks like an amazing answer choice. And it might be an amazing answer choice. It might even be something that's appropriate, but it's not most appropriate based on what they specifically said in the scenario, on those keywords and phrases. So I want for you to always read all of the answer choices and eliminate them to yourself. Bet yourself $5. This one's not the answer because it doesn't at all address my keywords and phrases. It doesn't address the goal of the teacher in the scenario. It isn't best practice. It isn't research-based. And identify why it's incorrect before you eliminate something, making sure that you cross-reference with your keywords and phrases. So let's begin. A school district has implemented a bring your own device or BYOD policy, which allows students to use their internet-capable personal devices in class with teacher permission. Teachers are planning to have students use the devices for end-of-chapter quizzes. Which of the following is the most appropriate way for the teachers to ensure that students who do not own personal devices can participate? So I'll give you a moment to, look it over. And then I want to see what keywords and phrases do you think need to be, addressed before we begin answering.
Allow students to use their internet.
I'm sorry? All right, what are we thinking? What's important here for us to pay attention to?
Trying to implement.
Right, so they're implementing a BYOD. And what's the goal here? Always ask yourself, what's the goal?
Have students use devices for end of chapter quizzes.
Yeah, that is the goal. The goal is for them to use devices, right? We want to have all students use devices for the end of chapter quizzes. That's the goal for sure. That's the teacher goal here. And we're looking for most appropriate. Now, what do I say whenever you see most appropriate?
That there's going to be two similar or two good answers.
Right. They might give you more than one appropriate response, which means you could use both of them, but one you should use over the other based on best practice, based on what they've said here for us. So the goal is that the students use devices for end of chapter quizzes, and we need to find the most appropriate, the best way to make sure that students who don't own personal devices can still use a device for the end of chapter quizzes, because that's the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now let's read through the answer choices, and we're gonna, if you think of one you want to eliminate, keep it in mind because I'm going to ask you at the end. A, requiring all students to answer the quizzes on paper and to submit the paper. B, providing loaner devices from school inventories that are capable of accessing the quizzes. C, asking students to share their devices with students who do not own a device. D, telling students about activities in advance and requiring them to borrow or rent a device. So what can we eliminate and why?
A and D.
I want to say A and C.
All right.
I say D also.
Let me hear why A is wrong. Okay, give me the rationale.
A is wrong because the teacher wants to implement paper and the scenario is asking for technology.
Right. This one changes the assignment. It doesn't go with the goal. The goal is not addressed here. The goal is for them to use devices for end of chapter quizzes, right? That doesn't do it. Somebody else said D. Why is D not the right answer?
I mean, that wouldn't be right to tell a student in advance. That's just like, telling them they can't even participate.
Right. And it's for a grade. Are you kidding me?
Yes.
It's for a grade and I'm supposed to borrow or rent. I have to rent
Right.
something to get a grade in your class. That is preposterous. And in fact, it's illegal. In the Texas Education Code, I don't know quite what number, but if we are giving something for a grade, we must provide. So if it is in the lesson, it is literally our job to figure out how to make them be able to do the goal or objectives, even if they don't have the device themselves. And so this means if I am an English teacher and let's say I want to read a book with my class and we don't have copies for everyone, and I tell the class, you guys have to go and buy it. I can't do that. And I can't give anybody zeros if they don't participate because they don't own the book that I made. Like, that's not a thing. I can only give this quiz, this activity, if I have the resources for everybody to master and do well. It literally would be unfair to do otherwise. So D is incorrect because it is against the law. What else? Marco, no. Sorry.
I would say C is wrong because it's not the student's responsibility for other students. Well, it's not their fault that the other students don't have their own devices.
Right. And when my children started having phones in high school, I wasn't like, oh, lend your phone to your friends. Like, that wasn't a thing. I was like, and don't lend your phone out. Like, don't be sharing your device. If you come home with a cracked screen and it's because Miss Sauceda told you to share your device with someone and they dropped it, I'm going to be really annoyed a little bit, So it's just not, could you do that? I suppose, but should you? Absolutely not. You shouldn't have to. And that's not even, hold on 1 second. I literally have to go. Sorry. So yes, remember that for this exam, you would never think about like your own personal experiences, your own schools, or if you've worked at a campus before, or working at a campus, because this is a theoretical exam. In theory, there is a loaner device in the school inventory for everyone to be had. Is that the case on every campus in Texas? I don't know that. I would guess probably not. But there are no limitations on this exam. It is going to be, fully stocked with resources. You find a way and provide it for them. The student never has to go, teacher never has to go and purchase extra resources because you have them there on your campuses with your peers and your support from your administrators. Now, is that always the case on campuses? It doesn't matter. For the purposes of this exam, it is best case scenario, Utopia ISD, Utopia High School, Utopia Middle School, Utopia Elementary, where it's always best practices. Theoretically, this should take place. Okay, guys, do we have any questions?
Yes, Ms. Sauceda, on Saturday, what are you going to go over?
We're gonna do some more domain 3 questions and then look into domain 4. Do
Okay,
an overview of domain 4 and look into the Yeah, Texas Education Code and some of those other sort of legal documents.
Right. Okay. That's awesome.
Okay. So, let me know if you guys have any questions between now and Saturday. If you haven't already attempted that practice exam, I would definitely suggest you do. That way you can send me your scores and we can get a little bit more specific with our instruction.
Actually, Ms. Sauceda, I did purchase it before I took the PPR, the exam. Now, can I repurchase it again so I could take it again, or is it just a one-time buy?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about that. I would imagine that Pearson, they're so like money hungry that they would charge you again for the $10. You know,
Right.
I that's what I would imagine. Probably shouldn't have said that on video, but they do make it unnecessarily difficult.